consenting to being filmed in that way. And there's further information on the front of the agenda pack, which you can take note of. Item 2 is apologies for absence. We don't have any apologies. We do have Councillor Carlin, who isn't able to join us in person, but is joining us online for the item on debt collection and how we deal with debt. So thanks for joining us online, Councillor Carlin. Item 3, urgent business. There are no items of urgent business that I've been made aware of, so we can move on to item 4, which is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest?
Yes, hi. So myself, alongside the Lib Dem group, signed the open letter to the council regarding the use of enforcement bailiffs, but I'm approaching this issue with an open mind today as part of the agenda item that's coming up on number 8, council tax collection. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Connor. Okay. Any other declarations of interest? I don't see any, so I think we can move on. Right. So item 5 is deputations, petitions, presentations, and questions. So we have a deputation from Acorn, which is about banning the use of private sector enforcement agents, otherwise known as bailiffs. So thank you for coming today. You also, some people from your organisation came to our Scrutiny Cafe and contributed to that, which we were very thankful for. So you have 3 minutes to present your deputation. Once that 3 minutes is over, there will be an opportunity for committee members to ask you questions and for you to respond to those questions. So who's going to start with the deputation? Hi. Would you just press the button? Yeah.
Okay,
thank you.
Cool, great. Should I begin?
Yes, please.
Okay. We are here representing members of Acorn, Haringey and households across the borough, asking you to scrutinise the use of private bailiff companies in Haringey. We believe that Haringey Council should end the use of private bailiff companies to collect council tax debt and commit to enacting a new approach to debt collection. We started campaigning to end bailiff use in Haringey in 2022, and Acorn is now campaigning against the use of private bailiffs nationally. Several councils have already changed their policies as a result. There are 3 main issues with the council's approach that require your attention. 1. Using bailiffs is an aggressive and intimidating way to collect debt. Citizens Advice reports that over a third of people interacting with bailiffs are subject to behaviour that breaks the law, while 60% of people report intimidation or harassment. Using bailiffs therefore likely increases the burden and spending on other public bodies, including mental health services. 2. Using private bailiffs to collect council tax debt does not improve people's ability to manage their finances or help councils maximise their council tax income. Bailiffs add charges, compounding residents' inability to pay. Policy and practice have found no correlation between council tax collection rates and bailiff use across London boroughs. 3. Private bailiff companies are not incentivised to improve payments in the long term. They make money per additional charge they levy on residents and always pay themselves first. If they actually helped residents better manage their debts, they would be put out of business. While the introduction of the ethical debt policy might have reduced bailiff use slightly, it has not significantly brought down bailiff use in our borough. Last year, bailiffs were sent to almost 9,000 individual council tax cases. That's nearly 1 in 10 households. The poorest, most deprived and most ethnically diverse wards in Tottenham Central or Northumberland Park are 4 times more likely to have a bailiff knocking than households in Fortis Green or Alexandra Park. Over 20 community groups, trade unions and councillors from across parties agree that this is a massive problem and signed our open letter. Our council doesn't seem to have a clear understanding of the problem, and so far councillors have been unwilling to engage in attempts to improve the situation, including by working with Acorn. Cabinet member responses to our questions have included assertions that bailiffs are mainly used to collect debt from landlords and people living outside the borough. Landlords do not pay council tax, and Haringey data clearly shows that bailiffs are mostly being sent to the poorest wards. We were told that the council intended to establish a working group on debt collection in late 2023, but this has never materialised. So we are here to ask that you look into this matter in detail and recommend changes on policy to the council leadership. Other councils across London have taken a more progressive approach. Hammersmith and Fulham has ended private bailiff use almost entirely, while Southwark has brought them in-house, where they work more closely with debt support teams. We would gladly provide you with all the information we have gathered on policy alternatives and the situation in our borough. We would also encourage the committee to reach out to other councils to better understand the workable routes to ending private bailiff use in Haringey. We are ready to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for keeping to time as well. So now is an opportunity for committee members to ask any questions of the deputation they may have. Okay, I first saw Councillor Worrell.
Thanks for the deputation. I just wondered if you could, if you had any examples of Acorn members or other people you've been in touch with who this has happened to in like a detrimental way, if you could give some example of like the impact that you're concerned about.
Yeah, it's in the briefing pack that we I think shared in advance.
The testimonials aren't in it, but we can.
Oh, okay. We've got testimonials that were in a briefing prepared, but I think they've got edited out of what was sent, but we can share those further. So the two notable cases. One was an Acorn member who had a bailiff turn up at his door, did not identify himself, acted very intimidatingly. Our member had no means of knowing whether this person was actually a bailiff or just someone trying to rob him. Absolutely refused point blank to leave, shoved his foot in the door. In fact, when this person became a member because of our campaign, because of this experience. We also had another case of a woman who was pursued for, I believe it was over a year, for about £1,000 of council tax debt, which she didn't actually owe because she'd moved house at very short notice due to issues with one of her flat that she'd been renting and then moved to another one. She got absolutely floods of letters and texts from bailiffs, which caused her an absolute mental health nightmare for, I think it was over a year, until the council finally admitted that they had made a mistake and she didn't owe anything. She called and emailed the council numerous times over this period, but absolutely nothing changed, and she spent the whole time having her mental health destroyed by essentially harassment for a year by bailiff companies.
Thanks. If I can just follow up on that, because I can see in what you've sent us, you've given a couple of examples of cases where bailiffs have been used. So I just wondered how many examples you have. And how many of them are people who are really in a position where they're not able to pay? I mean, obviously, what the example you gave was a different kind of example where, in your view, this was an error and it was debt that wasn't owed. But maybe there are other examples where council tax debt is owed because somebody has fallen into debt and is unable to pay. Or maybe there are other types of examples. I mean, what kind of variety of examples do you actually have? How many?
Onto this, like we have had lots of conversations on doorsteps. We regularly go out door knocking across the borough about bailiff use. Not everyone necessarily agrees to put their name to a testimonial. I think one of the things we'd quite like the scrutiny committee to do would be to actually talk to people who've received visits from bailiffs and actually get some information on their experiences, because what we found so far when we've engaged with the council is they don't seem to have that much information about who these people are, and we're not really satisfied with the answer that they're landlords or live outside the borough. We'd like, there are clearly bailiffs being sent to the poorest and most deprived wards in our borough, and it would be good if the council would do some direct work to speak to those people.
Thank you.
Just as a small volunteer organisation, we don't have huge resources to do that kind of work, so it's quite difficult to identify the experience of everyone who's had bailiffs sent to them in that way. But yeah, it certainly would be good information to find out more about.
Okay, thanks, and I do appreciate that. Thanks. Councillor Connor, you had a question.
Yeah, actually, I've got two. So in the pack that we've got later on about the bailiffs and enforcement agents, we get information that says that without the enforcement agents, there would be just under £2.5 million that wouldn't have been collected. So obviously some was collected, some obviously it was written off, but some was collected. So if we didn't have outside external agencies collecting, what would your sort of thoughts be around whether that money could be collected? The other one you said about us doing in-house bailiffs. In regards to that, in the pack, we've got that was going to cost the council too much money to bring it in-house to set that all up. So in light of this, I know we were saying earlier about, not doing finances, but in light of the financial situation at the moment and across all councils, or a lot of councils actually, not just Haringey, would you say that this is the time that's realistic for Haringey to spend money on setting up an in-house, enforcement agents, if we don't have the money at the moment and we are actually getting money from the government to support us? So those are my two questions really, about how would we bring debt in if we didn't have enforcement agencies, and what would we do if we can't afford to bring it in-house? What was your sort of thoughts on those? Thanks.
Yeah, those are good questions. And yeah, it's not something that it's not something that you can just shove to the next day. I mean the statistic 2.5 million is brought in by bailiffs. The presumption is that the council wouldn't do absolutely nothing in relation to those people who it's sending bailiffs to if it wasn't sending bailiffs to. So the comparison is what it would get from another method. I mean, certainly Hammersmith and Fulham Council have had quite a lot of success in sending agents who are not bailiffs around to people's houses and agreeing repayment plans. There are obviously other options open to councils where that's not working. Some of them more coercive, some of them less. Sorry, what was your second question?
So it's in our pack. It says it's going to it's going to cost Haringey Council a lot of money to set up an in-house enforcement agents sort of bailiff setup. So as Haringey is struggling like other councils around money at the moment, if we couldn't afford to do that, then what are there any other options?
I think, again, this is something that as a small community organisation, we don't necessarily have all the answers on. But one of the things we're asking the Scrutiny community to do today is to go and speak to Hammersmith and Fulham and Southwark councils and understand how they've done what they've done and see what could be possible in Haringey. So I don't think we'd necessarily have the answers for you in a blueprint here, but we would really like the Scrutiny committee to go and talk to Hammersmith and Fulham and talk to Southwark to see what they've done and see what could be workable here. Don't know.
There's a couple of other points. So one, in terms of intermediate steps, I think that they should hopefully be in the briefing shared, but there are things we've shared that are sort of perhaps lower effort asks in, thank you. So one is in line with a call from the Children's Society, which is not ending bailiffs per se, but ending bailiffs being sent out to households with children as a sort of intermediate measure. And then just also introducing flexible repayment options. And perhaps the lowest effort one is to making sure that if communications are being sent out to residents, that their case has been referred to enforcement agents, make sure that they are informed of their rights as clearly as possible, in both on the website and in letters. I know this is done to some extent. I know Haringey does do this in the communication, but in the I can't remember which council it is. I think it might be Chichester. If you go on their website and the page about enforcement agents, they have direct links to where to complain if the bailiff companies they use have misbehaved, which, as we've heard, is a very common occurrence nationally. So something like that would be, just as a first step, very welcome. And on the cost points, as Ali said, we don't have all the answers on that. But I guess one point worth making, as touched on in the initial statement, when bailiffs are sent to people's homes, they're taking money from the residents out of the borough. So yes, there will probably be upfront cost in setting up whatever the alternative in-house would be. But the idea would be that you are then keeping any money from residents going to the council rather than being taken by enforcement agents to these sort of multi-billion-pound companies owned by venture capitalists in Japan, as they are in some cases.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Buxton, you next.
So One clarity and one question. The Southwark, Hammersmith and Fulham councils, when did they adopt those policies? And then follow up, but that's just clarity.
Hammersmith Fulham, I believe, was 2018. Yeah. Southwark, I can't. I think it was slightly earlier.
I think slightly earlier, but it's happened in stages. So I don't think it was introduced immediately. I think it was over a few years, but we do have detailed information we can share, I think. But again, we would really like the committee to speak to Southwark Council to find out how they did it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that the point of my clarity was, had it been 2023, that's not that long to actually scrutinise how well that has come into effect. But 2018 is a substantial time. A separate question, kind of based on what the last answer was. I mean, what substantial difference? I mean, it sounds like the big problem. Well, one of the big problems is intimidating behaviour and the behaviour of not enforcement officers, because they're not enforcement officers, bailiffs, private bailiffs. I mean, that sounds problematic from a general point of view. We have a lot of outsourced companies that we use for various different things. We had our leisure centres outsourced until recently, which were external providers, and there's still a standard of care that we would expect from that. So how much of it is they're private over the behaviour is just unacceptable?
Well, so on that, I suppose it's probably a bit of both. Quantifying is probably quite hard. The point I would make, I guess, about having it simply run in-house versus being an external company is that you have more direct oversight and specifically democratic oversight. So if there are cases of misconduct, then a resident can complain to the local councillor about it, and then the local councillor can speak to council officers who have done this, or who supervisors will know who have done it, in a way that you can't when it's a company that has an external contract and quite as easily. But yes, obviously, we would prefer nobody to have bailiffs of any kind sent to their home. That would be our ideal outcome. And if you dealt with less coercively, per the Hammersmith Fulham example.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to basically understand from your point of view, or from your experience of working with residents who have been subject of bailiff and unpleasant experiences with bailiff. I just want to basically understand, obviously in 2021, Haringey Council adopted that ethical debt policy, and as part of that policy there were a wide range of support offered to residents who are kind of in a difficult position. Sometimes it's like, obviously if somebody is for no fault of their own not able to pay their council tax, then there should be some support. So I just want to understand, like from your experience, how do you think the policy is, if making any difference, any changes, or are there any suggestions that you would suggest to make that policy implemented even more robustly? So I would be keen to hear that. Thank you.
It's a good question. I think where the policy has been most effective is in, say, the provision of information, a place where you can call. So what we've found is that there's slightly fewer people, maybe when we looked at all the stages, going into the funnel towards the bailiffs in the first place, because I think they get a phone call rather than just a letter. There's a bit more effort at that side of things to stop people getting into the bailiff funnel. But once they're in it, the amount who progress up each level to getting to the point of getting a bailiff sent to their home, that doesn't change. So I think most of the gains have been made at the start of that funnel. I think in terms of the ethical debt policy, I mean, we talk about the numbers in the pack, that it doesn't seem to make, it hasn't made much difference to the number of people ending up being sent to the bailiffs. But I think one thing I would also say is there's other areas where we've struggled to find substance. That one of the promises made was that there would be special protection for vulnerable residents. There would be a kind of triaging system to stop them getting funneled to the bailiffs. And one of the first questions we asked is, what's your definition of a vulnerable resident? And we didn't get an answer. And then we didn't get an answer. And then what we were eventually sent was the national statutory guidelines governing bailiff use and how those can sometimes deem someone vulnerable. So we didn't find much evidence of a working system for saying this person's vulnerable. What are we going to do with them? And I think something the Scrutiny Committee could explore more of is whether that's happening, how many, say, people with mental health difficulties are being stopped from being funneled towards the bailiffs, which is again a promise of the policy, and maybe what could be set up.
Okay, thank you. And we're kind of coming to the end of the time allocated for this item. I just had a couple of very brief questions of clarification. The first one was when you say bailiffs were called on 9,000 households, nearly 10% of households in Haringey, are you saying, is your claim that 9,000 different households received visits from bailiffs? Or is it just that they were referred to bailiffs and bailiffs took other action, like, for instance, sending letters that weren't from the council, they were from the bailiffs? So that was my first question. And the second question is your assertion that bailiff use is highest and is highest against the most deprived people in the borough. Is that just a kind of you're just surmising that because of the geographical distribution of bailiff usage, or do you have some actual figures that show that it's the people who are most deprived who are most likely to receive a visit from a bailiff?
I believe the 9,000 figure is referrals to enforcement agents rather than bailiff visits. Yes. And on the second question, yes, it is simply a correlation between wards where bailiff referrals happen and deprivation in those wards. It seems vanishingly unlikely that that correlation exists, but the bailiffs are visiting the wealthiest households in, like, Tottenham Green Ward and Northumberland Park, but it is technically possible. I'd also, given that if you're on a lower income or deprived, you're probably more likely to fall into debt. It would be quite unintuitive if that were the case.
Sure. No, I just wanted to clarify what information you had to base the claim on, but that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming today. I'm now going to ask Councillor Carlin, who is responsible for collection of council tax, to give a brief response to the deputation. So, Councillor Carlin.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for your deputation, and I hope that you will stay for the next item, which I think will answer some of the questions that you have posed this evening. The point about Haringey and what is different in Haringey is that we do actually have an ethical debt collection policy. And if you go through, which you will see in the next presentation, the different steps that we take before we actually refer cases as a last resort to enforcement agents, and the steps that we take even once they have gone to enforcement agents, they will answer quite a lot of the questions that you have, because it has to be seen in context. And while I fully appreciate that that there are places where bailiffs, and possibly even the same firms, where bailiffs are not behaving properly, in Haringey, all bailiffs have to wear cameras. And the complaints that have been referred to us, the complaints since beginning of last year, in all of those, when we have looked at the camera footage, the bailiffs have not acted improperly. And in actual fact, the case that you refer to of the member of Acorn, he actually did explain to me what had happened. And in that case, sending bailiffs to that household was completely appropriate. It was not a household, it wasn't a pleasant experience. I'm not suggesting that it is, but in actual fact, that was a household where the lead tenant, who was supposed to be paying the council tax and the other tenants were giving him the money, was simply not paying it and was ignoring the letters. In terms of the locations, we all know that Haringey is a borough split from west to east, where the figure I use is that life expectancy, mortality rates drop 8 years from west to east. And our council officer, Andrew Mackey, will put up a map to show you that in actual fact, where we have council tax reduction scheme, the vast majority of residents who are supported are also in the wards that you have referred to. So rather than saying we're targeting those wards bailiffs, one could actually say we're targeting those wards for support. The most important thing that we do in terms of our how we operate and what we need, the most important thing is for residents to get in touch. And everything that we do and all our correspondence asks residents to get in touch, because if they are having difficulty, we have a number of internal council organisations, such as here financial help schemes, that will help the residents who are having difficulty in paying their council tax. The last thing that those residents need is a campaign that's going to actually make them feel afraid of contacting council, is a campaign that suggests we will deliberately target them because of their poverty. That is not what we do, and that harms the very people that you are intending to help. The most effective thing would be to encourage residents who are having difficulty in paying to get in touch. Then we know, because there will always be, and there are occasionally people who slip through the net, but we need to know and we need to be able to help them. So thank you for your deputation, and I do hope, as I've said, that you find the next section and the presentation that Andrew Mackey will present tonight as useful in answering some of the questions you brought to tonight's committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlin. And you brought this deputation to this committee, so it's for me as chair to provide a formal response, but that, according to the rules of procedure, that response will be in writing and will be informed by the discussion we have under the next item. So any recommendations we might want to make on the back of this deputation, obviously we'll do under the relevant item on the agenda. So thank you very much. If you'd like to remain for the next item, if you could take your seats in the public seating area, thank you very much. Okay, right. So that was item 5. The next item on the agenda is item 6, which is meet the minutes of this committee. We've got 4 sets of minutes, which just shows how many times we met in January, 4 times. So the minutes are for us to agree them for accuracy. But I believe before we do that, Councillor Connor, you had something to raise about the minutes of the meeting on the 30th of January.
Yes, Chair, thank you. So just to say that the recommendations in the pack for that meeting aren't actually in the pack, but I think I had a conversation with the scrutiny officer and I think there's a way forward on that.
Sure, yeah. So what I'll do is I will publish the finalised table of budget scrutiny recommendations as a separate appendix or next to the minutes on the website. So it'll be a clear table that sits beside it.
Are you happy with that? Great, thanks. So with that being said, are we happy to agree the minutes of those 4 meetings? That's agreed. Thank you very much. Item 7 is minutes of scrutiny panel meetings. We've got 3 such sets of minutes. Does anyone have anything they want to raise about the minutes of their panels or other people's panels? Okay, so it's for us to note receive and note the minutes and to approve the actions in the minutes. Are we happy to do so? That's agreed. Right. Okay, so moving on, we're now on item 8. This is council tax collection, support for residents, and the role of enforcement agents. So we have Councillor Carlin, who is here for the actual collection of council tax. We have Councillor Chandwani, who is here for debt prevention policy and support that we're giving our residents. We have Carrie Manovich, Assistant Director for Customer Services, and Andrew Mackey, Revenues Manager here. And I believe there's a set of slides. So Carrie, are you leading with the slides, or is that Councillor Carlin?
There's actually going to be three of us talking to the slides, but I think Councillor Carlin's going to introduce.
Oh, okay, Councillor Carlin, you're gonna start on this, are you?
Yes.
Great. Go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. As I said previously, in relation to the in response to the delegation, it is important for us to look at what we do in Haringey holistically, and to look at and to take into consideration the ethical debt collection and policy and the support that we give to residents in terms of collecting council tax debt, and then also the use of enforcement agents, which is a last stage, and which is in Haringey tightly controlled. I would just didn't previously respond, but I would invite the committee at a later time to actually look up, for example, what Southwark's debt collection looks like. Their homepage is quite harsh. If bailiffs are sent to the household, the fees are still the same, and it actually says we will charge you immediately £420. They will only send out a limited number of letters per year, 3 maximum per year, etc. So the fact that in Haringey we use external enforcement agents in a controlled manner does not in itself mean that that is the wrong policy. I will hand over to Andrew, who will go through the slides with you. They are fairly detailed, and he will go through them briefly and then take questions afterwards, which can be made to either me, Councillor Chandwani, or the officers. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Carlin. So my name's Andrew Mackey. I manage the teams that collect council tax, business rates and the bid levy due to Haringey. So again, as Councillor Carlin said, thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain our approach. I'm hopeful following this meeting and in view of the information we've supplied already, you'll have confidence we have a robust process in place with protections for the most vulnerable people in the borough. What I'll do now, I'll give a brief overview of slides 2 to 9, and then spend a bit more time on 9, which is our actual process. So with regard to slide 2, I've put down. The first slide shows the council tax collection performance, which, as you can see, hasn't fully recovered pre-pandemic levels. It's still below. And we are forecasting for 24-25, the collection won't meet the target, which is the green line. The blue line is actual collection as it stands, and those figures were taken very recently. Yep, so we've reduced our target for 25-26 to take into account we're not going to achieve the target we have in place for 24-25. Next slide, please. So I won't read through this whole slide. So of particular note when considering measures to collect council tax is the amount of council tax contributes to the services of the borough. We've asked our finance colleagues to confirm the amount, and it's 40% of our revenues budget is directly funded by council tax collection. So if it just next slide, sorry. During 2021, we introduced the ethical debt reduction policy. The aims of this policy was to adopt an approach to debt recovery which was both empathetic and effective. So as you can see from the slide, you can see the commitments set out within the policy, and those we've already met. next to the ticks. In slides 5 and 6 is evidence of our communications. So this is our reminder letter on the first slide, showing how it's written and the support available on both the front and the back. And the next slide is the summons notice. These include support for the our financial support team, as well as desk advice organisations, the CAB, Money Helper, and the National Debt Line. Over the last year, we've introduced additional measures to support residents, including improvements to our communications, support available, and checks prior to referral. I won't go through them all there, but they're all listed on that slide. If you go to slide 8, sorry. Okay, so slide 8 is showing the statutory process on the left and Haringey's process on the right. Haringey's process, as you can see, is 65 days, whereas the statutory process is 28 days. There's also additional points in the process, such as text messaging, voice notes, which we do in addition to what we're required to do by legislation. And if we could move on to 9. So, okay, so slide 9 is showing the point the summons is issued to the point of we take some action. At the point the summons is issued, an arrangement is given to all council taxpayers and residents of the borough. This isn't a requirement, it's something we do in addition to the standard process. We do 3 checks. One of them is we check our adult social care database. We check to see if anyone's in the receipt of CTR, and we run an additional check through a software called Pathway on the remaining cases, which segments debts to allow us to see who is in difficulty and may need support. Those identified as in hardship or registered on the vulnerability registration service will follow an alternative route of recovery, as I'll explain as we go along. So for all cases, a liability order hearing takes place on the date stated on the summons, which is the next green box. If the resident pays the arrangement set on the summons, there's no further action will be taken. If the resident defaults on the arrangement, then a reminder will be issued. Again, the reminder isn't something we're required to do, it's something we do in addition to the standard process. So if the amount is unpaid after the arrangement reminder is issued, then the case will follow one of 4 routes, as shown in the blue boxes. So the first recovery route, so those identified as in receipt of CTR will not be referred to enforcement agents. Instead, we'll look at an attachment of benefits or possibility of another arrangement. And the second recovery route is very similar to the first, is those who are registered on the VRS, Vulnerability Registration Service database, or known to our adult social care team. They will not be referred to enforcement agents, and instead they're signposted to support services, and further arrangement and or attachment will be considered. The third recovery route, those who have shown up on our Pathway product as potentially in financial hardship, they will be sent, currently sent another letter with details of our financial support team, and they allow further time to get support. As shown, there's a box just underneath there that we're looking at to explore additional support for those cases, and we're in talks with our financial support team, see if I can do some more outbound calls to those residents. They could potentially, if they don't engage with the support of the finance support team, try and give them, is potentially we'll have to in the end consider what we're going to do to recover the money.
Let me just clarify the top box, if they are on CTRS, which is a way for us to means test that they are of low income. The ethical debt policy says that they won't be sent to EA in any circumstance.
Sure. I was just following the flow chart, and I was seeing 4 possible outcomes, 2 of which are saying not referred to enforcement agents, and 1 saying cases referred to enforcement agencies. But the third one talks about a supportive letter, but does not state whether in the end they may be referred to enforcement agents, and that's what I was trying to clarify.
That's right. Yep. And then the fourth route is where we've picked up nothing through our initial checks, and there's no indicators prior to considering enforcement agent action. There's a check to see if we hold earnings or benefit details for a possible attachment, and where we do not, those cases are referred. So what I'm going to do now is pass over to Kari, who's going to go into more detail around the support available.
Hello, yeah, I'm Kari Manovich. I'm the AD for customer services in this area. And so as Andrew has outlined, we do have a really clear definition of a financially vulnerable household, and we remove those cases from referrals to enforcement agents. And as Andrew was saying, the additional check and the box that you were querying is new segmentation data that we have to identify which households are most indebted. So, you know, we don't have, other than the residents who claim council tax support, which of course are our poorest households, we don't have comprehensive income data, but we do now have this tool that tells us if households are in a high level of debt. And so that's where we're going to be reaching out to these households and offering them additional support in a more proactive and personalised way. But some of those households are homeowners and have mortgages, so they're not in that very deprived cohort that our council tax support recipients are. This next slide is about our financial support team. So this was one of the key pledges in the ethical debt policy to establish the financial support team. So this is a team that does intensive work with residents who contact them. So there's a helpline number that they can be contacted on. There's an email address, and they support around 150 residents every month with their financial challenges, which of course does include challenges in paying their council bills, and the team will, as it demonstrates on the side, you know, have multiple contacts with these individuals to really try and ensure that they have maximised their benefits entitlements, that they understand the wealth of voluntary organisations in the borough that are available to help them. So it's a really effective service that helps residents kind of get back on their feet when it comes to their finances. And yeah, and you know, it's a team that's been protected in the council's budget going forward, and it is the team that we are arranging to offer proactive support to the residents who we identify through our data are particularly indebted, so that we're providing that proactive level of support. Go on to the next slide. So this slide just illustrates that there are a really wide number of organisations or teams within the council, organisations within the borough, and then national organisations that exist to help residents who are struggling financially. And as Andrew outlined in the earlier part of the presentation, all of our communications is geared towards connecting the residents who are struggling with their council tax debt to this wide network of support. So the financial support team is a kind of key connector here. You know, call that helpline, speak to an officer, and if you don't know about this network of support, they will put you in touch. So you know, there are a lot of resources to help the people who are in the category of can't pay as opposed to won't pay. If we move on to the next slide. So the Here to Help campaign, I'm sure everyone has seen aspects of this campaign. And of course, in addition to communications, which go out across many different channels and all the council's main communication channels, we've also got staff who are sending out letters directly to residents who we believe are not claiming benefits and are entitled and could increase their income. And that includes direct phone calls as well. And these campaigns have been really successful in increasing the number of residents who are claiming benefits and making a real difference to the incomes of the poorest residents in the community. I'm going to hand over now to James Straw, who's our benefits manager. He's joining us remotely, and he's going to talk about the various financial support that his team offers.
Good evening, everyone. Apologies I can't be there in person. So as Kari says, my name's James Straw, so I manage our benefits service. That includes our housing benefit, cancer tax support, and a variety of discretionary funds that we administer. Just briefly want to talk over the wide range of support that my service distributes out to residents, specifically those on low incomes. Firstly, we have housing benefit. So this year, spend to date was about the start of March, was about £165 million, which has predominantly gone to pension age households, those in supported and temporary accommodation, and a residual cohort of residents who have yet to transfer across to universal credit. It's probably also important to note there are a large number of households on universal credit also receiving support with sort of living costs, housing costs, and childcare. Cancer tax support is our cancer tax support scheme directly supports low-income households to reduce their cancer tax liability. So it's a means-based support, means-tested support. Apologies. And you can get up to 100% discount on your council tax. And we have protected groups for those who are disabled or have children. In terms of some of the discretionary funding that we deliver at the moment, my service delivers the Household Support Fund grant. So this year we've distributed just over £4 million to low-income households within the borough. So that comes in a variety of support methods. So we have food vouchers for children who receive free school meals for the holidays. So we give £15 a week per child who would otherwise receive a free school meal voucher. We use a data-driven approach through our Lift software to identify low-income households who are in financial stress. That data comes directly from the housing benefit and cancer tax support database, and an algorithm is applied against that to identify which households are in most need. And then finally, we also have offered support to pensioners on cancer tax support who have not received the winter fuel payment this year. So up to £500,000 was allocated to support those pensioners with a £200 voucher. In terms of some of the other discretionary funding that we distribute, we have the discretionary housing payment scheme. So just over £1 million this year and that is for households who either receive housing benefit or the housing element of universal credit. And it's directly supporting those who are in direct risk of homelessness. So those in the most acute need. Our Haringey Support Fund is funded through our Household Support Fund grant, and that is our local emergency welfare assistance scheme. So that is an application-based approach that low-income households can apply for either help with sort of daily living needs, so food or energy costs, or white goods, or if they have another emergency or crisis, that can be considered through the scheme. So we've helped just over 2,000 households this year for just shy of £400,000. Finally, whilst it is a small grant, we do also distribute the clothing grant. So that is a grant that supports low-income households to purchase school uniforms for their children for school. Also important to note that we've improved take-up with this grant starting last year, but continue this year by using a data-driven approach to actually directly send vouchers out to those households who are entitled, as opposed to expecting those to find information about the grant and make an application themselves. As well as that, we have our income maximisation team. So I have 2 income maximisation officers that sit within my welfare service. There's a few separate parts, some of which Kari's briefly touched on already. But firstly, they do offer sort of income maximisation work. This is primarily driven from referrals that we receive into the service. So they will review household circumstances and they will assess whether there are either any errors in what they're already receiving or if there's any other support available, and they can either directly help them to apply for that support or they can signpost them on to the appropriate authority to help them claim. So to date in 24-25, we've helped just shy of 500 households, and some of the outcomes received from that is £136,000 in backdated benefit payments, which have gone directly to households, and also estimated annual increase in income of around £500,000. So that's basically if benefits increased £20 a week, what would that be extrapolated over a year, basically. In terms of the pension credit campaign, Kari's briefly touched on. For the last 2 to 3 years, we've been working with Policy and Practice and GLA to write to households who appear to be entitled to pension credit. This year, we've also coupled that with a more intense support offering for households who on lift or look as though they're in most financial need. So my officers have contacted all of the most in need households on pension of pension age, and we've supported just under 400 households to apply for pension credit. We've also been able to offer holistic advice to them about whether they'd be entitled to attendance allowance or whether they've got someone that cares for them who may be entitled to carers allowance and all the other support that's available to them. Finally, the attendance allowance campaign has kicked off just from the start of January, so we're still waiting on data to come back. But the officers are also providing support over the phone to any households who are requesting advice on what they need to provide, whether they think they'll be entitled, or if they need help filling out the form, then we're signposting to citizen advice for that support. You can just get to the next slide, please. Thank you. And just finally, I just wanted to have a brief case study about sort of a real world example of how the team does help households to improve their situation. So there was a household who was referred into the service by a member who had around £1,000 worth of council tax arrears and also a couple of £1,000 worth of rent arrears. There was a mother, disabled adult son, and an adult daughter who was in and out of work. And there was a high level of confusion as to what they needed to pay, what their instalments were, and they got behind. So the service reviewed their circumstances. We supported them to get their universal credit payments sorted out so they were correct. The council tax bill was all assessed and corrected, and all of it was effectively the outcome of that was that as opposed to being £1,000 in arrears, they moved to being in credit of £300, and that credit was used to move forward into the new financial year, which has reduced their instalments moving forwards. A check has shown that this household is now still up to date with both the rent and council tax. So the intervention has helped support a long-term improvement in their circumstance. Next slide, please. And apologies, I'm not sure who I'm passing across to here.
So passing back to me. Thank you, James. As shown, so I just go through these last, I think it's 5 slides. So as apologies. So as the title suggests, we only use enforcement agents when other requests have failed. We send emails and text messages in addition to letters. We undertake 3 separate checks to identify those who should not be included when we refer to enforcement agents. We put additional arrangements in place where someone falls behind with their payment and issued a summons, and we send reminders where they default on that arrangement. And prior to referral for enforcement agents, we look at potential for attachments. Next slide, please. Sorry. So this slide shows of the 1,464 cases, reliability awards we obtained in January, 426 of them have been referred to enforcement agents for collection. So there's a big drop there of how many cases we actually obtained and how many went to the enforcement agents. Go to slide 19. Okay, we've just completed a procurement for enforcement agent services, and as of the 21st of April, the agents will be operating in line with the contract, which is a clear specification, and there's details there of what that specification includes. And slide 20, please. Okay, so this is again, I think Councillor Carlin covered this at the beginning, but this is just showing how many complaints we received during since January 2024. And we received 27 complaints. In all cases, we look at the body worn camera footage, and in all cases, only 1 complaint about EA behaviour was escalated, and no improper behaviour was witnessed in any of the complaints. One of them went to stage 2, and that was not upheld either. So next slide. Okay, so to look at our referrals at 24-25 up to the 31st of December 2024. So up to the 31st of December, we'd referred 7,246 cases. And what's shown there is some information around the return reasons. As you can see, the highest return code is paid in full, followed by client request. Client request is where one of my team requests the agents return the case And I think the level of cases we are requesting returned evidence is that we will step in where appropriate and recall cases from the enforcement agents. It's not a case with the agents, we leave that with them. We will recall cases where we need to. Slide 20, next one, please. Sorry. Okay, we have asked other London boroughs about the number of enforcement agent referrals during 2024, and 16 of the boroughs responded, leaving us, we are 7th lowest, as you can see by the chart there of enforcement agents referrals. And final slide, please. Yeah, sorry, next one. Sorry, I didn't realise that jumped off the page. No, just next, keep going. Okay, and the final slide is the reasons why we have chosen not to use an in-house enforcement agent model. And briefly there is cost, as Councillor Carlin said, our priorities, performance and conduct. We do monitor this and we haven't had any issues with this, and the enforcement agents currently have give us added value as listed there. And that is
okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for talking through the slides. It's now time for questions. Everyone's got questions. I'm going to start though, if members don't mind. So my question is we've had a deputation today who've said to us that in their view and based on the fact that more bailiff visits are taking place in the more deprived areas of the borough, they believe that more bailiff visits are taking place against more deprived families. Now, we've also had a presentation that explains how we're doing our best to help people not to fall into debt and help people who do fall into council tax debt to find ways to pay and to avoid bailiff visits in the most other than in the most extreme circumstances. So my question therefore is the fact that more bailiff visits are happening in the east, is that due to the fact that we're failing in some way to reach and help the people that we're trying to help through the ethical debt policy, or is it that the ethical debt policy only works for a minority of the most vulnerable and most deprived people, but there are still a large number of people who are unable to pay but don't fall under the auspices of the ethical debt policy? Or the third option is that perhaps what Acorn are telling us isn't quite correct and that there are other structural reasons why these cases are happening in the east, and it isn't necessarily that we are sending the bailiffs to the most vulnerable people and the most poorest and most vulnerable people. Thank you. Councillor Chandwani, would you like to answer that?
Thank you. I've never remained silent for so long that I think it was a good hour. Okay, can I firstly just say that I think everybody in the room, whether you're part of a campaign group, whether you're a councillor, whether you're a councillor in your position, or whether you're an officer, nobody wants to be in a situation where people who are under mental health stress, financial stress, are feeling harassed. And I think that we need to be really cautious about how we define harassment, because whilst the body worn camera might not show anything untoward or against policy happening, having someone come round your ass asking you for money is quite a horrible experience, and even though it's within the professional guidelines. And so as a person myself of a background where my dad lost his business and we had bailiffs coming around all the time and we had to hide behind sofas and keep the lights closed and the curtains closed, it's a traumatic experience. And so the whole basis behind this is that let's do a little bit more to see if we can connect with people before we have to go there. And that starts from the whole spectrum. It starts from the spectrum of why don't we have a CTRS scheme that makes sure that if you can't pay, you don't have to pay. And for 25,000 people in this borough, they either are getting a substantial discount, or for over 16,000, they're not paying at all. So that takes them out of the risk. And then those people who might not be eligible for CTRS because they're not even claiming the right benefits in the first place to then make them eligible, because that CTRS is a consequence benefit because you need to be on something to get it in the first place. And so investing as a council in making sure we've got income maximisation officers and financial support team, and also the housing tenants also pay into getting financial inclusion, is also vitally important. So going back to your question, Councillor White, there is still people that that are not being excluded from enforcement agencies because they're not on CTRS. So there is still people that haven't come to us for help and we haven't been able to maximise their income. And then there are still people that are not known to adults and not known to any of our vulnerability. And it's really difficult for a council who, the reason they're collecting this money, by the way, is to provide services. If they don't collect it, we can't provide services for vulnerable people. And it's about getting that balance. And so one of the big things we're trying to do is say to people, we might have not caught you from the CTRS net, we might have not caught you from this net, we might have not caught you from this new AI technology that's going to identify if you're a vulnerable resident or the adults list. But if you feel you're vulnerable, come to us. And that whole branding of we're here and we're here to help is really important that we all promote. So we know we've got a long way to go with that. There are some people that will, and I don't think it is just Acorn's campaign. You know, it's anybody who's had experience with anybody who's kind of debt collecting. The red letter is scary. The second red letter is scary. The whole thing is scary. And so to break that and get people to trust us and come to us is a really hard uphill struggle. In terms of the data, I think I might have heard something a little bit different, so maybe we can clarify. So they, Acorn said that their data was not people that had bailiff visits, it was people that were referred to, and that they assumed that they were deprived because of where they lived. They didn't have any evidence of that. So there are a lot more people because they're in HMOs and they're in flats and they're in hostels. There's a density and a volume of people in certain areas versus probably Alexandra Ward and Fortis Green, etc. So that is one of the anomalies, but it isn't. The map that I was hoping that was going to be on the presentation today would also show that our CTRS is also mirroring the same kinds of places where this is happening. I think it's a fair challenge to find out if there's any further circumstances that give us a pattern of why that's happening in certain wards. And I think that that's a fair thing that we've got to keep using data, intel, and really looking at all of our cases and seeing if there's any patterns, because only from that evidence do we know how to shape policy and how to shape services. So I think it's a great challenge. I don't have the answer, even though I've spent 5 minutes speaking, but I just wanted to be really clear what we're trying to do and who these people could be and how we can get them the help. And if they are low income and they are financially stressed, then the help is there.
Thank you. Right, everybody has got questions, so I'm just going to go around. So Councillor Connor first.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to know, on the slide where you say the process steps we followed once a summons has been issued, and then you talk about the excluding of the vulnerable groups, and rightly so, you said about the CTR and adult check, and then the other ones that were also listed. Is there a way of doing that before the summons are issued? So on your 65 days where you're sending text messages, and is there a point where those people's information could be added or put through the system, because Councillor Chandwani was saying how stressful it is to get those red, the red letter and the threat. Actually, if a whole cohort aren't actually going to be taken through that process anyway, because they're not, you've got different boxes for them, could we do it at the outset rather than put them through 65 days of thinking they are going to be going to court? Because if I got a letter saying I was being summoned to court, I generally think that's where I was going. I wouldn't understand that there's this next process. So I'm just wondering, is there a way of taking out that cohort of residents before we get to the summons have been issued? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. So our council tax reduction scheme is where we calculate the level of council tax that we think a household should pay. And so, we're giving total council tax reduction to a large number of residents, and then we're giving significant reduction to a remaining portion. In order to secure our legal right to recover the money, we have to get a liability order, and we can't do an attachment to benefits or to earnings from work without going to court. So if we were to remove residents much earlier on in the process, we are potentially removing people who could pay through one of those methods, and we have got no legal recourse to do it if we don't go to court. So our efforts, and I recognise there is scope for improvement, as Councillor Chandwani's recognised, and as you've asked, Chair, we do want to reach people and make sure that they have as much support as possible, whether that's benefit support or help with debt advice agencies. And I think we're not currently connecting with all the residents that we want to at the earliest possible stage, and that's really our improvement goal, is to try and ensure that we do.
Okay, so just to be clear, so on that 65-day process, is there any way of saying that you'll get issued a summons, because that's what we legally have to do? However, if you are in any of these groups, the vulnerable, all the rest of it, we will be contacting you to go through a process, of how this is going to happen. So yes, you're issuing that letter saying that summons have been issued. That's the legal bit, but actually underneath, we're here to help. And that's exactly what you were saying about the here to help bit. I just think that would maybe reduce a lot of people's stress at that point, because they're going, okay, this has happened, but actually there might be something that, is coming up, rather than waiting like a month before you get somebody phoning up going, actually, we're here to help. And you're like, oh, thank goodness. But, anyway.
So our offers to help start from the council tax bill. So the council tax bill and the reminder and the text messages and the emails, they all offer help, and they all offer the phone number for the financial support team. But I think you're making a really helpful suggestion around the particular cohorts that are never going to get referred to enforcement agents. And I think we can definitely look at incorporating that into our communication so that we can take that worry off people's minds.
Thanks. Councillor Worrell. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carlin, did you have something you wanted to bring in on this point? I didn't see your hand raised.
Sorry, I was just going to suggest that Andrew does have the map of the borough of where the numbers in receipt of CTRS in each ward, so he could put that up to clarify the point.
Okay, we're just trying to put a map up on the screen. Okay, and just to clarify, what does this map show?
The map shows the
So
numbers
it's
in each ward in receipt of council tax reduction scheme.
So the areas with darker colours are wards where more residents are in receipt of CTRS. Okay, thanks.
Yes,
As we
that's
can
correct.
see, it's darker in the northeast and lighter in the west, like every map of Haringey. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, Councillor Worrell.
Thank you. I firstly had a clarification question about the slides. On the slide where it says enforcement agents are only used when all other requests to pay have failed, and there's a little table, January 2025 data. Is that summons that happened in the month of January, or is that have happened to date? Or like over the course of a longer period? Because it just seemed like more than I would have expected for 1 month.
Sorry, Andrew, could you put your
Apologies. Yeah. It's the month of December, and it's 1,464 in that month.
Okay, yeah, it is quite a lot. So I firstly wanted to ask, it's similar to what Councillor White was asking about really, but I think it's been, really useful to see all of the additional efforts that the council does make in order to try to protect the most vulnerable. But I think hearing that statistic about where the highest number of cases are is a cause for concern when you don't have maybe the full and complete data and you're thinking, does this suggest that there actually might be some gaps here or that we're not quite meeting what we're trying to do? So I guess firstly, my question was, would we be able to get the data about how many bailiffs are being sent in, whether it's by ward or whether it's a bit more information and background about, the types of case, the types of household. I don't know what's possible there, but that might give a bit more of a true picture of what's happening for us to kind of base our opinion on. My other question, and this might be really naive, but like a lot of what we're talking about, it's in terms of what the council can do, it's around income maximisation. Are you claiming all the benefits you're entitled to? Are there other discretionary support available to you? But presumably, as has kind of been alluded to, there are still a significant number of situations where it's people who kind of can't access any of that stuff and they've got debt and they can't pay, or they would really struggle to pay. So I'm wondering kind of what actually happens in those situations on the whole. Like, do they end up declaring bankruptcy? Do we end up seizing things from them? Like, because and I guess again, in terms of thinking about what the impact we're actually having with our policy is, it'd be again interesting to know how many such cases of that, where those types of cases, like what proportion of the cases they are. And then just a final question, and this was just about the ability for residents to get in touch when a mistake has been made or a possible mistake. Because I've had a couple of cases as a ward councillor where an error has been made and a resident has received some kind of court summons out of nowhere or something like that, which is obviously really scary and stressful. And it's been by contacting a councillor that they've ended up being able to get that cleared up. But clearly, whatever communication avenues they had tried previously hadn't worked. So are we confident that we have like a really clear method for residents to get in touch when potential errors around council tax collection have been made, and is it properly monitored and so on? So yeah, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
So Councillor White, if I take the first three questions, because revenues and collections falls under Councillor Carlin, so it's best that she and then answers her officers to answer. So I guess one of the things I would say is that this is an iterative process. So we started this process in 2021 when we launched the ethical debt policy. Prior to this, it didn't matter whether you were on CTRS, you were going down the same really short chain and you were going to get a bailiff at your door. I dispute the fact that the ethical debt policy hasn't made any significant progress, because 25,000 people now will never get a bailiff or an enforcement agent at their house. That's a solid fact. Where we need to move forward to is that we know that there are some people who are struggling but also not eligible for CTRS. And so the next kind of iterative process to that, and what the ethical debt policy asks for, is how do we define vulnerability, and what have we got in our power to define it? Because we need to have a definition. And yes, there is a legal definition for enforcement agents, but we're a council. And so the likelihood that if you're known to adults, or you're known to children's, or you're known to a certain service in the council, automatically deems you as a possibly vulnerable person, because you wouldn't be working with them, you wouldn't have a social worker. So the next part of the iterative process was to introduce the cross checks with adults databases, and that's been in place now. And then we're still missing people. So this is why we turn to technology, and why we're using technology to give us data insights into that board. So this is why you've got 3 boxes, and why you can go down this one if you're on CTRS, you go on this one if you're known. And so we're constantly having to do that. So with that comes the innate acceptance that we're not at a perfect place yet. And we still could be sending enforcement agencies to people's homes who could be deemed as vulnerable. And I'll give you an example of where I see there's a gap right now. And so we need to learn from that. We need to get that data to see how we plug that gap. Adult services will only have cases of people that are Haringey residents known to Haringey social services. If you are, and I have cases in my own ward, placed into this borough by another borough, for example, Enfield, your adult social care case will still be with Enfield. And therefore, we could be sent, but your council tax will be with us. And so we could still be sending a bailiff, because we've done the adult check and it's come up as not known. And then we've gone down the route of the enforcement agency. I also will say that I'm not sitting here today and saying that if you're a resident and you're in trouble, the onus is on you only to come to us to stop a bailiff coming. We are putting in measures and things to also stop us and recognise. One of your other questions was, what do we do when that person can't get any more benefit and just can't afford it, because people can't afford to live in London anymore? And I guess the thing is we've always been really clear as Haringey Council that we were never going to do this on our own. We have a partnership of, we call them advice family. So we've got advice family in our own council, because we've got, social workers, financial inclusion team, etc. We've got advice family from the voluntary sector, whether it's, Citizen Advice Bureau, Rog Women's, St James's Legal Centre. They also have to come in with their specialism and their qualified advice. We can't give qualified advice. So somebody might come, for example, and say, I'm not eligible to sign up for this because I didn't have enough NI contributions because I was, stationed outside the country and I didn't get enough. That needs someone to give them proper legal welfare advice to get them sorted, and we have to move that on. If it gets to a stage where people cannot pay, then all qualified advisors are allowed to ask for breathing space or debt respite legislation. They can get 6 months for somebody who is not known to have any mental health illnesses, and unlimited until that person is come out of their mental health crisis if they've got mental health. So a citizen advice bureau or a law centre or step change will say, we have to put a stop, like we have to get you a break. And they will sign off a letter and we have no choice but to accept it and pause all recovery or debt. So that came in under the previous government, and we have had breathing space applications that we've honoured. So there will be people in that situation, and we will try everything we can to get them the right support. And unfortunately, what we've got to be careful of is when we know that there is no public interest in trying to pursue somebody. I had a case of a domestic abuse victim whose partner was meant to be paying the debt and didn't. But she still lives in the property and her name was on the council tax, and then it goes to write-off. And then somebody in Scrutiny asks me, how come we've got such a big write-off? So there is an end to this, and there is a pragmatic way of looking at it as well.
Thanks. And I think Councillor Carlin it needs to answer the part about the actual collection from Councillor Worrell's questions.
I'm going to ask officers to answer that because it's quite detailed. Thank you.
Thanks.
So sorry, the question about obviously if they contact us, how can they get the matter resolved? Obviously without.
Yeah, and there was also a question about whether we could get some better data about where the enforcement agents are actually visits are actually happening, because I think we've been working off a bit of assumption and wider data here.
Yeah, that's fine. So yes, we can get data for the enforcement agent visits happening. There's two stages when the enforcement agent receives it. It's a compliance stage and enforcement stage. It can only be at an enforcement stage if an agent has visited. To the compliance stage is the initial letter. Some people just pay at that letter and they won't be visited. Yeah, so we can get that data. So in regards to the obviously contacting us and try and get matters resolved. So there's no doubt about it. There's currently a backlog within council tax. This goes back probably to late January, early February. We've recently taken on additional temporary resource to support us clearing the backlog. It's already having an impact. But regarding recovery action, the cases that have outstanding correspondence don't get issued a summons because we have something in our system which stops it. And there's a further check in place, a liability order, where they won't go to an enforcement agent if we have correspondence outstanding we haven't dealt with.
Thank you. Could I just follow up with you with the case I was thinking of in particular, because I just would be quite interested to know how what happened ended up happening. It was fine in the end, but it just for someone to receive a court summons after nothing just seemed like quite a terrible mistake. So yeah.
Yeah. No. Okay.
Okay, thanks. And the information that's been asked for, can that be sent to
Yes.
to the Scrutiny Committee? Thanks. Yes. Okay, thank you. Councillor Buxton.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks for the presentation. One thing that, from my point of view, seems to be missing from the presentation, which is very detailed, goes through a lot of steps, I think is one of the most important bits is I'm in a very privileged position that I have never had a bailiff come to my door. So I'm kind of imagining what the process is here. And that's what I think is missing, is that what are the protocols? So we've had a testimonial of someone turning up at a door. And I think regardless of who you are, if it was a different council officer for a different matter, I'm dealing with casework where, people are still a bit wary of, a housing officer, for example. So I don't quite understand what the process is for a bailiff turning up at the door, what sort of identification they need, what sort of demands they're asking for, and that's not in the papers. And I think fundamentally, you have highlighted that there isn't that many complaints, and the complaints that do go of those, they're all seen as fine and everyone was doing everything. So that's fine. But we're getting to a point with these residents who are having bailiffs visit that they have either ignored, well, they've ignored the summons and the various, 60-day process or however long it was. They have ignored that and they haven't engaged with the council for whatever purposes. And they might have been caught as vulnerable, but those people who are already not engaging with the council, why would they then raise a complaint is kind of one of my questions, that actually potentially here we have a underreporting of any sort of complaints. So I guess I want to be explained what happens in that scenario, and that, what safeguards are in place for the resident when they're being faced by this very intimidating circumstance. And I do have a separate question to do with the financial support team and the phone line there. I mean, you say of the people that we've helped. From my experience with casework on council tax and just generally contacting the council with someone to speak to, that is one of the trickiest things that residents say that they find. So yes, great that we've helped X number of people, but also how many people are then sitting on the phone for an hour waiting to talk to someone and not getting through, and then just being, okay, well, sod it, I'm not going to do that. So, is that effective? Yeah, so those are kind of my 2 points, if we can come back on those.
Okay, so
explain the bailiff process at
Yes.
the door and financial support team.
So the bailiff process, I think, Councillor Carlin, are you going to ask your officers to respond on that?
Yes, yes, I would like the office. I can respond, but I think it's better if they do so. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I can cover that. Okay, so when the enforcement agents visit, they obviously they'll knock on the door. They're not allowed to force entry at all. They abide by sets of standards set by the Enforcement Conduct Board, as well as our own specification, and it goes into behaviours, how they should behave, how they shouldn't behave, and when they should return cases to us. So they're contracted to go by those standards. Yeah.
I mean, okay, so let's have an example. Turn up at the door, knocked, whatever, everything has, it's not let's say it's not a particularly good case, that person doesn't want to pay, whatever, I don't understand that. Or, you get to the end of the process. I mean, is there at any point that the resident is directed to, look, if you're unsatisfied with the service, which you probably were, let's face it, but this is how you raise a complaint, or what sort of checks and balances are there? I guess I'm putting out.
Yeah, so they obviously have their own complaints process with the enforcement agent companies, but the Enforcement Conduct Board is a body which is separate from the enforcement agents who investigate all complaints. They were set up in January 2025, so that's where they go.
And as a resident, how do I know? How do I know that is an option for me?
It should be on the bailiff paperwork, but I don't know if that's hand.
So but that should be given to a resident.
It would have been given.
It would have been given to a resident. Okay, sorry, that's just the clarity that I need. I've not ever received it myself. So, okay, I think that kind of clarifies it. And then the financial, unless someone wants to follow up.
I can see Councillor Chandwani wants to come in. I think it is, yeah.
Thank you. Can I just say, Chair, without being naughty, I think one of the things that Acorn asked for was to make sure that rights and how you complain about bailiff's conduct goes on the website. And I don't think Dana's nodding. I mean, she's the cabinet member, but I don't think it's a bad idea. And maybe we also need to look at making it really clear on the letter if it's like in font 6 or something. But I think it's a really good point, because if we have got bailiffs that are misbehaving, then we need to make sure that people feel comfortable to complain, and they feel comfortable, they know how to, at least know how to, not just comfortable. And so I don't think it's a bad recommendation. But anyway, I'll go back to answering my question. So I just want to make sure we don't conflate the financial support team and the council tax queries line. So when you get a letter from council tax, the council tax number is at the top, and then on the back it says if you have problems with paying, you can contact Citizen Advice, financial support, etc., etc. So they're two totally different lines. To my knowledge, there has not been a massive kind of swell of people saying I can never get through to the financial support team. And I get their data, they answer the calls pretty fast, and they get they've got the right resource for the right amount of calls that they're getting. Obviously, during this season of council tax billing, it does shoot up a little bit. As the Cabinet Member for Customer Service, I'm not happy with the council tax part of the line. I think it's about, it could span between 45 minutes if you're lucky, and 2 hours if you've caught people on a bad day. And I don't think that's okay, especially when they play that type of music as well when you're holding. I mean, it's just awful. But just think about somebody who's really desperate to get hold of someone, hasn't got any money, and probably has like £3 credit on their pay-as-you-go phone. I mean, that's it, isn't it? You've lost it by the time you get through. So I do think maybe we can come back, Councillor White, to discuss work that's been, I think we're coming back on the 8th, and one of the things on the agenda is customer service, and then we'll have the officers here. But services need to think about what resources they need to put into customer service and make sure that it's right sized for that. But in terms of the financial support, residents are choosing, it's an opt-in service. Residents are choosing to come to us. They're not just coming to us about council tax, they're coming to us about rent, they're coming to us about all sorts of things, electricity bills, etc., school uniforms, all of these things. And we're now going to, for the first time ever, start doing proactive work, which is now calling people. Now, we might get a different response because now we're calling people that chose not to call us. And so that would be a really good, interesting pilot to see if we review that in 3 to 6 months' time, how that went.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Ganesh, do you still have a question?
Thank you. I've got 2 questions and a comment on the case study. My first question is, it's just for me to sort of understand first of all, thank you very much for the presentation and for detailed answers to the questions. Very helpful. So I just want to understand a typical case that legitimately justifies to be receiving a bailiff visit, and like a case that's, council has done everything and exhausted everything, and like not a case that I don't know, there's vulnerability. Is there a case that you have dealt as an example that you could give us? My second comment is on the case study, which is extremely useful. I just wanted to say, if you had sent, for example, bailiff to this family, I think council would have acted punitively, because there's clearly that there is a reason why they have accumulated debts and they were not able to. So I'm glad in a way that the support offer goes with every emails, because it helps them to understand that, there might be a different explanation, like the initial idea that, oh, somebody's haven't paid, let's just send them a frightening letter. But it's more like, okay, let's give them a chance to explain why that has happened. And this lady was clearly in a position to explain that, I'm sorry, it's not my fault. You don't know all the facts about my family situation. Here they are. And then we realized that actually no, that she doesn't own anything because her circumstances are different. So I'm just sort of, basically the reason I'm sort of explaining that historically that's how council would have acted in my experience of working as a benefit advice officer for a number of years. That's how the typical cases were similar to that, where resident had a different explanation, but council assumed a different understanding. So it was, yeah, so a typical case where they legitimately deserve a visit from bailiff.
So thanks for that. So I think that's two questions.
Two questions.
And I think, yeah, so the question about the case study in the papers, I think is for you, Councillor Chandwani. And then you asked for a case study where a bailiff would be used. I think that's for Councillor Carlin or her officers.
Yeah, just another further clarification as well, Councillor White. You know, the household support fund or the various type of support that council is offering to our residents in need. Is it still there? Is it still available to access for the residents? What's the sort of, and until when would it be there? Or available until when?
Councillor Chandwani, do you want to go first?
I was determined to get home in time for the apprentice, but I think I might have missed it. But if I could go first, that would be great. So in regards to question 2, which is about the case study, this resident was not under threat, or this household, sorry, was not under threat of getting any enforcement agencies or bailiffs to their home. What they were getting were very confusing letters that had different parts of the household with different entitlement. And this was also happening with their rent account. It wasn't just council tax. And sometimes you just need to sit down and you just need to read what's going on because something's not quite right. I think in these situations, and council tax is very complex, and it has different variables. You know, when my fiance, now husband, moved in with me during lockdown, I suddenly lost my single person discount, and we both had to be interviewed, and I had to pay back. But we were asked where his dentist was, how many clothes he has at my house. I mean, there was all sorts of madness that we had to answer for that. And yet again, with this particular case, there's a mother who's a carer, there's a son who is disabled and is unable to work, and then there's a daughter fluctuating in and out of work. So everything was getting very muddled. But in no circumstance did this family ever get sent to enforcement agents because of the fact that we knew there was a disabled person in the household. So they got caught by the vulnerability net, if that's the right word to use. In terms of the second question around what help is available, third question around what help is available. So everything that's in your slide deck, the school uniform grants, household support fund, Haringey support fund, I think housing benefit was in there, etc. Everything that we have given you, it is still going to be here for next financial year. So next week it will still be active with a restart of a budget. In terms of part B to that question, how long will we keep it for? Depends on how many times I can keep winning this argument as a cabinet member, but hopefully for a very long time. I watched the spending statement yesterday by the Chancellor, and I watched some of the questions today to Stephen Timms MP, and they are going to reform the Household Support Fund, which pays for our local welfare assistance. And they're going to reform discretionary housing payment, but I don't know any more detail than what I heard today, and that's all the officers know as well.
Thanks. And who wants to pick up the question on a case where a bailiff? Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
Okay, thanks. So we do a case for an example. So there was a case where we had a gentleman who effectively argued that the council tax law didn't apply to them due to the Magna Carta. effectively they call themselves freemen of the land, and they used to these legal arguments which don't make much sense to say that I'm just not going to pay because the law doesn't apply to me. So effectively, he didn't come to us with any sort of, he couldn't afford to pay. It was the fact he's not paying because the law doesn't apply. So in that case, it went through the process and went to enforcement agent, and ultimately went further than that. But because he was a property owner, the enforcement agent didn't get anywhere either. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, is that a typical case? I don't know. It doesn't
sorry,
sound
Matt,
like a
can I
very
come in?
typical case. Oh, darn. Sorry, Councillor Carlin, you wanted to come in.
I will refer again to the case that Acorn brought of their member, where, as I said, it was actually completely appropriate that enforcement agents were sent. And in that case, what happened was that it was a joint tenancy. There were a number of people living in the property. They were all paying their council tax to one person who was named as the person responsible for council tax. It wasn't an HMO, and for clarification, for a comment that was made by Acorn earlier, landlords are responsible for council tax in HMOs where people rent their rooms individually. Then landlords are responsible. And in that case, but in the case referred to, the person in charge of paying the council tax just didn't pay it, and kept the money from the other residents in the flat, which they didn't know about. And so he ignored all the letters. He didn't pay it, and enforcement agents went to the property. As I've said, it wasn't pleasant. It isn't. But upon him coming, the person who was responsible for paying it borrowed the money and then paid the debt in full. It's not, the idea is not that we send enforcement agents to households. We would obviously rather not. In terms of the data that we have, the pathway data, this new check that we use, of the pathway data, the 17%, it's in your slides. We found that 17% were found to be in financial difficulty that hadn't been picked up previously through other checks. But in actual fact, over 40% were actually financially stable and hadn't paid their council tax. And as Councillor Chandwani Seema said earlier, why do we need council tax? We're not using council tax for some spurious reason. Council tax that people pay is for us to deliver services to our residents, and it's for us to keep our libraries open, and it's for us to provide a CTRS scheme and to provide all the help and all the things that we do to run our Harrogate loans and Harrogate works,
that's
etc.
clear.
So yeah, so that is, that's why. But over 40%, as I said, just over 40% were found in the pathway checks to be financially stable, but it wasn't a debt. It's about prioritizing a debt, and that obviously just wasn't a debt that those households were prioritizing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Carlin. Now, we've had a very, very lengthy discussion and we've gone significantly over. Councillor Connor, do you have a very brief point that you want to make?
Yeah, very brief. It's just because the deputy's main question was on the cost of bringing it in-house. So obviously there's been in the paper, it said that it would be too expensive to bring it in-house. Now, I'm not saying you've got the facts and figures here with you today, and if the chair's happy for a written response to that. But it's just really for the panel to understand, because the deputies have asked why we're not bringing it in-house, and the papers have said it's too expensive for the council to do that. Could we have some of that financial breakdown if there is any available, or are you happy to provide a very quick answer now? Thank you.
Sorry, Matt, I can come in on that.
And I am keen to wind this item up quite quickly, quite soon, because we do have another But can we get that as a written answer? I did want to wind this item up just by asking the committee if we're happy with what we've heard tonight, or if we want to go any further with this and look at how other boroughs do this. We've had a lengthy discussion about how this is done in Haringey. Are we interested at all in how the boroughs that have been mentioned by the deputation run their council tax collection, either without the use of bailiffs, apparently in Hammersmith, or through an in-house service, which I'm assuming works financially for Southwark? Maybe there are other boroughs that we might look at that do things in a different way. Is there any appetite for us to look further at this? Councillor Worrell.
I am interested. I think for me, it would partly depend on that data that I've requested from Andrew in terms of assessing, you know, how much we actually think this is something we're not getting right. In terms of putting more scrutiny resource into it, at least. So I'm potentially interested, but I think I'd want to look at that first.
So can I propose then that we take the information that we've asked for, the information that Councillor Worrell has asked for, and the information that Councillor Connor has asked for, and then we have a discussion at some point about whether we want to return to this and ask more questions. Councillor Buxton.
Yeah, just a very quick one based on what I said and what Councillor Chamwani said about making it more prominent on complaints on the website. Could that be listed as a recommendation?
I'm happy with that. Is everybody else happy with that as a recommendation? Councillor Connor.
And I think Carrie said that you were looking at maybe you could take some of the information prior to the summons being issued and adding that to the information on the 65 days. You said you could take that as a recommendation. That would be good. Thank you. But I too would like more information, but then I have already declared an interest in this. But yeah, I would like to look into more detail about the other offers available, and the financial information I think will be key on that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And Councillor Ganesh, you had a point to make.
Yes. Sorry, I should have asked this question earlier, but I think it could be maybe a written answer or some sort of a response would be really good. I was actually going to ask a question about obviously this bailiff at external organization they're not part of. So how do we sort of how do we hold them accountable? How do we hold that company accountable? What's the process that for us to kind of make sure they're doing the right thing, or they're compliant with our ethical debt policy, as well as what's the processes really of holding them accountable?
So we have had some discussion of this earlier in the meeting, but perhaps rather than taking more verbal responses, we can take a written response on that point as well, and if that's okay, and we can wind this item up and move on to the next item. Councillor Chandwani, you had a point to make.
Sorry, I'm just quite conscious that one of the things that Acorn asked the committee to think about was what's happening in other boroughs. And I know you want to see information first, but obviously as a cabinet member, both myself and Councillor Carlin have also asked staff what's happening in other boroughs, and they've already got quite a lot of information. So maybe they can just impart that with you. And if you then want to take it further, you can, but it's not like something we haven't looked at. My understanding about Hammersmith, it might be different to the deputation. I don't know if you want to add anything about Hammersmith.
Yeah, so we share everyone's interest in learning best practice from other councils, and I think that Hammersmith and Fulham and Southwark have both experimented in this area, which is really helpful for everyone to learn from. Hammersmith and Fulham did cease the use of enforcement agents, but that did result in significant build-up of council tax arrears. And as that now, they are using external enforcement agents again. So they published a policy in December setting out their approach to debt collection and explaining that they would use private enforcement companies for pursuing debts that they had no reason or no other way of collecting, and no information to suggest the individuals were vulnerable. But that's not to say that Hammersmith and Fulham doesn't have some really positive practices that we can learn from, and we are committed to doing that. And Southwark has an in-house enforcement agent model. So they do send enforcement agent out, but instead of wearing the private company's ID badge, they wear Southwark Council ID badge. They have to follow the same processes, protocols and standards as the private companies do. But in addition to their in-house enforcement agents, they also use external private companies as well, because there are cost challenges to having this service in-house, and the external enforcement agents benefit from economies of scale that an in-house council service can't. So, that's part of the rationale.
Okay, thanks for that. But I think if we could get, as Councillor Chandwani has suggested, if we could get the information in writing that you've got on the other boroughs and any other boroughs that you've looked at as well, that would be really helpful. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for coming today. And yeah, it's been quite a long item. So thank you very much. And you're free to leave. Thanks a lot. Right, now, apologies for the late start to this item, but we've got the item on the market strategy now. Councillor Gordon, Keith Trotter and Pippa Gwetterbock are here for this item. And I think, have you got a presentation for us? Brief. If I think it has been circulated, and I'm hoping members have had a chance to read through it. So if you could be as brief as possible in the presentation, please, because I think we've all had a chance to read through it, and then we can get to questions and hopefully not have to stay too late. Thank you. We've got this slide show. We're just bringing the slideshow up.
Chair, would you like me to just?
If you'd like to give an introduction while we're waiting for the slideshow to come on the screen.
Oh, I don't know if that's my phone. I
Think-
beg your pardon. It is.
Just keep the phones away from the microphones. That's the trick.
Apologies, Chair. Rookie error. Should know that by now. Yes. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting us to lead on this item. We've been doing a lot of work in the inclusive economy team on our market strategy. It was obviously from my point of view, it was a manifesto commitment. It was also my personal priority. I've always taken an interest in markets, and I feel that part of the way in which we've been developing our placemaking strategy, that is part of it, to have thriving markets in all parts of our borough. We've got some that exist, and we felt like that this was a need, but we've now been working on this and got evidence to back up the strategy that we've been developing. So we're sort of part way through. We believe that it is part of a corporate delivery plan, and it's part of a key component part of Opportunity Haringey, which I'm hoping that my officers here have got, there you see, we have props. Opportunity Haringey, which is our inclusive economy framework, but a fundamental part of that is developing our markets strategy. So that's my introduction. I see now magically on the screen we have our slideshow. So I'll hand over, I think that's to Pippa, and then Keith is going to fill in on all of the fine detail of the technical side of the strategy.
So just to build on what Councillor Gordon's just said, I think markets are a really key feature of not just Opportunity Haringey, but also our placemaking visions, shaping Tottenham and shaping Wood Green. They support both Seven Sisters markets, but also Holcombe markets, and we're working in partnership with the BID for Lymington market as well. So it's a really good opportunity for partnership as well as placemaking in town centres. They bring vibrancy to the streets, economic wealth to the borough, and also an opportunity to link with community and cultural activity. So they do a lot of different things for a lot of different people in a lot of different places. We don't have the big established markets like Ridley Road, but we do have some really well-loved smaller markets across the borough, really well spread across the borough, in fact, doing different things in different parts of the borough. And they're really popular with residents and traders. So lots to be positive about. Keith is going to outline the strategy and the recommendations, and over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so go to the next slide, please. So that's, in a nutshell, the purpose of the market strategy. It's looking at the various markets that already happen within the borough, both those that the council are partially involved with and others that are run by private operators on private land. Looking at the health of those markets, identifying opportunities for markets in other town centres as well across the borough, which was a key component of the strategy. A lot of engagement through the process as well, both with residents, businesses within town centres and market traders and operators. Looking at the risks and putting recommendations down for the future, and then an action plan which officers and lead member worked on to basically do the direction of the markets. So a lot of the slides on this presentation is just to provide people with flavour of the markets that are under development, such as Seven Sisters Market, are already in place. Permanent market halls like at Wood Green, the emerging new Seven Sisters Market, Holcombe Market. And if you could go to the next slide. So this gives a flavour of the amount of engagement that the strategy undertook. There were face-to-face and online surveys of businesses. We got a really good response rate in a quite short space of time. I think just going back to what was said at the start, there's a lot of passionate people that really love their markets, and that really came across within the engagement. Next slide, please. So very much from the business's perspective, 2/3 of businesses thought that they really added benefit to, which is quite a high percentage. Sometimes there can be some opposition with local businesses to markets seen as sort of coming in to their territory, but I think if handled sensitively and correctly to add value to the town centre, then that can be a real boon. And that they wanted markets really core to the town centres, and their residents looking for not just the market and produce, but it's about an experience. And I think that's one of the changing faces of High Street, is that it's not just to purchase goods and services. People go there to spend a lot of time for entertainment, for leisure services as well. And looking for similar attributes indeed for new markets within Haringey. So a lot of benchmarking was done as well. Going back to my point there, that it's more than just retail. It needs to be a very strong visual impact, clear branding in locations where there's already high existing footfall. For a market to be viable, it's not in itself a sufficient attractor if it's positioned in a low footfall area. So hence some of the recommendations that have come out, and where we trialled new markets have been in areas of high existing footfall, very obvious places within town centres. A point that markets need to be reflected across all types of council policies. We've talked about the benefits of markets, not just for the economy and for employment, but also for potential test trading of new businesses, particularly around young people as well, but also bringing in culture and leisure to our town centres and tying into things such as the Borough of Culture, for instance. So there's a very strong support for markets across the borough from residents and businesses and stakeholders. Very much the sort of thrust of the recommendations were to build on the existing markets that we already have in the borough. As Pippa said, they're quite small in scale, but very well loved, and we want to strengthen those. Potentially grow the number of stalls, put them on more days of the week, more frequently. And then look at particularly Lymington Avenue, Crouch End, Tottenham Hale, and Muswell Hill in terms of increasing frequency of markets. And critically, in terms of our role, it's around creating and supporting new markets and current markets, bringing the operators together and curating and facilitating them rather than directly delivering them ourselves. As Pippa said, we don't have the large scale markets of some other London boroughs, which then brings in the revenue to be able to have a markets specific team. So all of this needs to be done from the sort of licensing and street trading perspective and inclusive economy. Just some more photos. So we're increasing the number of market days. So that's the days that a market is held, and also increasing the number of market stalls within those markets. We're creating a market operators forum so they can all work together, raise issues of common concern with council officers across the council, increase markets profile and awareness amongst the public, bringing them all together under one umbrella, and a markets web page within the council's website, and facilitate 3 new market locations by the end of this calendar year in Crouch End, Muswell Hill and Tottenham Hale. We pretty successfully trialled the Tottenham Hale market in Christmas ahead of schedule, with the support of some of the landowner and developers, and that proved to be really popular, so we're hoping to do the same thing again. And also work with the private sector market operators on private land, including Ali Pali, obviously, and Stroud Green also has a market on a school site as well. So bringing them into the fold as well and not seeing them as separate, and branding them all together under the Haringey Markets umbrella. And then the slide just previous to that, that's just an example of the new web pages. You've got the landing page. You've got a series of, I think it's 6 at the moment, markets with details and links to each individual website that tells you when the markets are being held. There's an active link there in the presentation, so you can all go straight to those pages, and then an interactive map across the whole borough to show where the markets are and when they're held. Next. And yeah, just in terms of what's been done to date, in the last year or so, we delivered 4 Christmas markets. Would have been more if not for the not so untypical December weather. Unfortunately, there were a couple that unfortunately were called off, and one that was rearranged for another weekend. But we had, for instance, over 800 people at Tottenham Green Market, over 250 children on the rides and entertainment that was put on there. So they do prove a real sort of draw in terms of footfall into the area. We've upgraded markets infrastructure across 4 market sites, so put in more power for more stalls to enable more particularly hot food services to be sold. As I said, launched the new market webpage, and we're going to be holding the market operators forum in the next month or so. And then we're also producing market operator and traders guides, which will be hosted on the website too, which will just give a sort of FAQ approach for anyone who's interested in operating a market or becoming a market trader. Those steps, how you go about that, and making it easier, which in turn will hopefully mean that there are less rejected applications or seeking further information or information that maybe has been completed incorrectly. So that should help us with that customer service aspect as well. I think that may be it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation. Again, I think everybody's got questions, so I'm going to go around the other direction this time. So, Councillor Gunnish, you waited so long last time. Now it's your turn first.
Fair Chair. I just wanted to, basically my first question is, what prompted us to sort of develop a market strategy in first place? And my second sort of question is, what additional resources would we need to implement this strategy? Because there's quite a lot of recommendation there that, you know, meetings, networking, and so on and so forth. And my last question would be, I mean, markets are really good ideas. Obviously, I think one of the most successful one is the Holcomb market. You're always, like, when you're passing there, it's thriving, like everybody's coming, getting their fruits and fresh vegetables and stuff like that. So, and it has a community kind of feel to it. But other markets with best intention in the world, they didn't really appeal much to the local resident. I think one of them would be was Tottenham Green Market. I mean, really good idea. They had nice stuff they were selling, but it was too pricey. And yeah, so what kind of, how would we make sure that the markets that we have are gonna, you know, deliver for our residents and be kind of deliver in a sense that they will appeal to our residents, but also contribute to economic life, possibly in some ways. I'll thank you.
If I could take that. Well, the prompt really was the manifesto commitment, and probably on my part a personal interest in the joy of wandering around the market and you know, and experiencing in a borough like Haringey. I think one of the joys is that we've got so many different flavours of market with, you know, obviously, you know, we've been missing the fact that, you know, in your own patch, you know, in Seven Sisters, that we haven't had the Latin market, you know, established for some time. You can almost stop holding your breath now because we are very, very soon going to be reopening that market. All of the stuff is in place. You can see the pictures there. So we will be re-establishing the Latin market. It's obviously on TfL's land, but we have been working tirelessly with Places for London. They've now fixed the roof. We've lent them the car park that belongs to us, and the units are in place. So very, very soon we will see a thriving Latin market once again in Seven Sisters, and I think that's going to be a major, major milestone, especially for local residents who have been, you know, waiting for this for far too long. So very, you know, a lot of enthusiasm from me in as part of this portfolio. In terms of resources, I think you know, that is a difficult one as ever. You know, everybody's been discussing the council's budget and so on and so forth. So what we see our role is as being a curator and making sure that we are leveraging other resources. So we've been working really, really closely with Wood Green Bid, that's the Business Improvement District, and they supported the Lymington Avenue market. They're very keen on that and, you know, want to encourage that. So it's things like that. We have got other sort of plans in the pipeline that maybe we could encourage a market elsewhere as well. But, you know, at least that was a sort of starter market there. So leveraging the business networks that we've got. And to that end, we are bringing together, I don't want to sort of go down a different rabbit hole, but I can't help myself but tell you that we've got a business forum that we are bringing together. So this is broader than, it's not just markets, it's broader about bringing all the businesses that are in London, that are in Haringey, I beg your pardon, together in a forum so that they can network and we can leverage that support. And then we can work on things like mentoring smaller businesses. The beauty of markets is that you don't need massive amount of revenue to do your startup. And we've got a lot of entrepreneurial a lot of entrepreneurs in Haringey and people with ideas. So there's no shortage of that. But obviously, getting started, most small businesses do collapse after, quite a short period of time across the country. So we want to sort of encourage that and use that business forum to help with that, as well as the Wood Green bid and the other trading partnerships that we've got in Tottenham and so on. I would encourage people to keep an eye out for our business bulletin, which comes out every month, which is full of information that is relevant to our businesses, and it's got quite a large subscription to it, hasn't it? So there's a lot of subscribers to our business. How many? Over 9,000 subscribers. So that if you're not, you're out of touch if you're not subscribing to our business bulletin. On your point about Holcombe Market, I agree. It's thriving. It's pitched at the right price range, and a high footfall there. I take your point about Tottenham Green, and I think it's probably horses for courses. Middleton Road equally, I think quite pricey for me, but I do quite like going there. So it is just I think experimenting with what works and what doesn't to a certain extent, and I think I think maybe regularity in Tottenham Green might help to encourage more and a wider variety of traders to come to that market.
Thanks. And just wanted to follow up briefly on that last point, which is, in terms of the council's role as a kind of curator and ensuring that because there are lots of different types of markets. You've got the kind of artsy, crafty ones. You've got the slightly posher food ones. You've got the kind of pile 'em high, sell 'em cheap kind of ones. And different markets will be successful in different places. Anyone who's worked on a market, as I have, will know that whatever you're selling, some markets it will work, and some markets it won't. So I suppose my question is more: are we by choosing the option of being a facilitator to other providers using our land to run their markets rather than running the markets ourselves, as some other boroughs do, are we kind of limiting ourselves in terms of our role of making sure that the right kind of markets are happening in the right places for the right people and serving our residents well, and maybe not being quite as successful as they might be otherwise, because we know our residents better than these other providers do coming in.
I suppose I don't know is the answer, whether we could be more successful on that. At the moment, I don't think we've got the choice of having an in-house team that would be focused on that. It takes an enormous amount of expertise. There are some boroughs that do it very well and some councils that do it very well. Stockport is one that does their Foodie Friday, and they've got a team, and some boroughs do it really well, but there is quite a big team of people with expertise. For some things, I think that the council probably doesn't have the expertise, and we don't have that. We'd have to build up a team to do that. I think that what we're doing is testing the temperature of the water with the strategy that we've got, and we can always look at whether we would expand that in the future to have a team that does a market. But there's a lot of expertise needed at the moment. All the licensing and stuff is done by the licensing team, and it works well. And where we work with market providers, they come in and they do a good job. Middleton Road is very, very successful market. So I think at the moment we're in the right place, but we're not excluding, any options. But I don't think we can just jump in there, because it would be one hell of an experiment. And I think that we don't have the resources in the council to do that at this point in time. So, but it's an interesting topic to sort of mull over. I don't know whether Keith wanted to add anything to that.
I mean, it is a balance, isn't it, between making sure that the market is viable in itself and makes a profit and it's attractive for an operator to come, versus offers the right product pitched at the right price. And that is something we've always kind of struggled with Tottenham Market in particular, Tottenham Green Market. When we contract an operator for a particular site, we can put on certain stipulations, like we'd like X percentage of market traders to come from the local area or to come from the borough, and then sort of sit and monitor that. And also in terms of what's on offer, we can also suggest what a good mix of products and services would be. And I think one of the points that Councillor Gordon raised was around that regularity as well, and establishing that. And the more regular it is, the more you get the same traders turning up frequently, which was always a bit of a concern with Tottenham Green Market. They would go other, they're in London, so they've got a lot of choice to go to, unfortunately. So you've got to work with the operator and the traders to make it consistently attractive offer, both for the traders just as much as the shoppers that are using the market as well.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Buxton.
Thank you, Chair. I think the last slide kind of highlighted the point with the picture of the mayor. And last year I spent quite a lot of time going to various different markets, and I think that's where most of my SRA ended up. Good that it was back in Haringey's economy. And thank you, Chair. You also stole my question right from under me, because there are loads of different types of that's all right. There are absolutely different types of markets, and I kind of want to focus on one which is most local to me. I think disputes some of what, Keith, you led with, which is Alexandra Palace Market. It's a great farmers market. It's been going since I was about 5, if not before. So it has been very successful over a very long period of time. But what is different with that one is that it's not in a town centre. I know Pippa might dispute, the bottom of Muswell Hill, there is shops there, but it's fundamentally part of Alexandra Park, or occasionally part of Campsbourne School, neither of which are town centres, as outside the Everyman in Muswell Hill, or outside the town hall in Crouch End is. So I think little craft markets do play quite a role around that. There's a lot that pop up in that area, but that supplies a different need to the farmers market there. And I kind of think I get the town centre strategy, but there are obviously markets like this one which function quite well beyond the town centre as well. And I wonder what thoughts have been taken in regard to that.
Rest my case. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think well, Ali Pali is a large, well-known destination in and of itself. You're right about the market being really well established there for a long period of time, so people know when it's on, it's regular. There aren't necessarily those large destinations that don't have something like that on offer that could generate that kind of offer elsewhere within the borough, not necessarily. So in terms of the council's perspective, we're focusing on the town centres and trying to drive footfall into existing commercial areas. That's not to say that if there were areas identified by potential operators as well, that we wouldn't work with them to try and make that work. And it may not be that it would be on public land. It could be on a private site, you know, where we would be able to engage an operator with that landowner. So focusing on the particular areas and the markets that we outlined doesn't mean to say that we wouldn't be open to exploring opportunities elsewhere, particularly if there was a good viability case as well and it didn't cannibalise on other existing markets in the borough.
Councillor Worrell, you had a question?
Thank you. Yeah, really, it's really good to hear about this. It sounds like really a positive, great thing for the borough. I had a question on, so given that this is part of our inclusive economy work, I wondered what sort of checks and balances we have in terms of like working conditions and you know, fair pay and things like that with the operators in terms of who we will work with and who we will promote. Because obviously we wouldn't want to be undermining ourselves by sort of promoting markets where actually there weren't like good jobs and stuff like that. Yeah.
So no, again, really good point. Obviously, there's the licensing process where the traders would have to fulfil particular requirements on the licensing side. I think the point of the inclusive economy team being more involved in markets across the borough would be to try and ensure exactly that, what you're saying in terms of good quality of produce, good quality of business, you know, and we would work with the operator and individual traders on providing business support. I think that the point around sort of fair pay as well is a really good one. We could certainly look to make that sort of a feature of the markets that we're either directly involved with or have a partnership role with. Absolutely.
I think the thing is that when with some of the smaller markets, that generally speaking, they tend to be, you know, individuals who are, you know, testing out their own produce and they're probably paying themselves very little. So that it's not like that they're employing, you know, other people and they're paying them less than the minimum wage and something like that. The experience so far isn't that. It's much more of, you know, a small business who essentially doesn't want to have the overheads of setting up a shop, having to have a shop front and all of that sort of complexity of starting up a business, but to sort of test out literally their market for, you know, whatever goods there are. We have had a lot of programs where we've been encouraging youngsters in particular to try and get into that. So again, where, you know, traders can mentor, you know, younger entrepreneurs to sort of encourage them into businesses. So we try and facilitate that. But that's sort of been more of a focus than sort of, you know, concentrating on things. It doesn't really seem to have been an issue because there isn't many people employed beneath the traders who are sole traders in the main. I think I'm probably right in saying that. But in terms of the operators, we've used a relatively small number of different operators, and obviously there are conditions there. The most important thing is obviously that they abide by all the food safety and all of that sort of thing. You know, that there is like standard, and that is double checked. So.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Connor, you also had a question.
Hi, thank you. It's good to hear the Latin market is actually happening. I remember back in Scrutiny a long time ago. I was trying to remember how many years ago it was that you and I looked at that. It was a long time. So it was really interesting that one of your I noticed on the slide, Muswell Hill was going to be one of the centres. So it's really just about engagement going on from here, because obviously you've got to this point. Now I understand that the town centre team structure has changed, because I had a conversation by pure chance with an officer who explained that the whole structure has changed. And I was like, okay. So at what point do we as councillors in those wards where these will be setting up get to meet up with the town centre teams? Because obviously we've got a lot of experience in that area. You talk about electrical points. I mean, just really sort of basic things like that, but actually onto the more strategic stuff, because we're really keen to get startup enterprises happening in Muswell Hill. We keep trying to push for that, and it's really difficult to get a place for that to happen. So I'm really excited to hear that that might be part of that whole strategy. But it'd be really good to sort of meet up and when do we get involved in that process? When do we come and meet people, share ideas, and just really get involved and understand what sort of market operators you're actually looking to put into that space? Because as has been said today, some would work, and I think we can probably guess some that might not. And my final question is, if you have that up and running and after 6 months we're going, right, this we can tell it's not working, we go along and just notice the footfall has really dropped off and there's not much going on, is there an opportunity for you to sort of say to the company that you're in, you've got the contract with, actually, guys, this isn't working, we need to rethink? Or are you going to be tied in to sort of like 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is? Do you think you'll be tied in for a length of time? Because I can understand traders would want that to get that stability and build up the custom, but at the same time, if it just doesn't work, it could actually be detrimental to the area, and actually everyone could be looking and going, oh, and walking the other way. I can see local businesses are not going to be happy if that happens, because then that's not going to increase footfall for them either. So those are my two questions. What about how are we going to get involved as councillors, and then what can we do about the procurement part if we think there's problems with that? Thanks.
Yes, in terms of speaking to officers, I think it might have been Graham that you spoke to. So yeah, that there's been a restructure within inclusive economy. Quite a few of the officers are still here and doing roles that are similar to what some of them did pre-restructure. Don't refer to them as town centre officers. They're business engagement officers, but they still fulfil a role of covering geographical areas and running business support projects. So it's Graham within Graham Philpott within my team, who's leading on the ground market development. Ian Cruz in the inclusive economy side of the team is leading on the sort of strategy and the communications and the operator forum. We're getting a new member of the team following someone's departure to the Wood Green bid actually in January. So a new starter in a few weeks' time. And then we have one more vacancy to recruit to, but we can start that conversation at quite an early stage. We can link you up with Graham, and we can come and talk to you about those plans within the town centres that we've outlined. This is a live strategy, and we're keen, now that we've got the winter out the way, to really start planning for the late spring and summer towards Christmas as well. So yes, absolutely happy to facilitate that. We'd normally offer, so for instance, Tottenham Green Market, we first offered a 12-month contract to the original, not the original operator, but the one after the planning permission was granted. That proved to be quite successful. We then offered a 3-year contract. We probably look to do something similar. So not offer too long a contract in the first instance. There'd be performance targets against that operator in terms of the number of stalls that they would need to supply. It's their responsibility to get the traders there and to sell the right produce at the right price, as we've talked about. So there would be performance measures there. And obviously, if they're on our land, effectively we're granting them permission to do that. So we do have even though there's no sort of funding that's being given to these operators directly from the council, we are allowing them to operate from our highway. So there is an element of control over what happens at the market, and obviously we want the businesses to be happy. That's why we want to grow more markets in the first place in those areas.
Okay, thanks. So I just had one quick question, which I wanted to ask before deciding whether to make a recommendation in this area, and that was looking at page 150 on the pack, which is the end of the study conclusions, where you discuss option D. And the way this is written, it seems to suggest that the time isn't right now for us to be considering running a council-run markets service for reasons of risk and our current financial position, but that it might be feasible to do that at some point in the future. But some of what I've heard this evening seems to be suggesting that this option just wouldn't work for Haringey because we don't have the scale, the opportunity to the locations where we could have markets on the scale like other boroughs, and I think there are other boroughs in London that run market services. I think I'm not sure which ones they are. You mentioned Hackney. Okay, you mentioned Stockport, I think. So what I'm wondering before I decide whether to make a recommendation is which of those two views are you taking? Is it something that might be possible in the future if financial circumstances improve, or is it just something that we wouldn't really be thinking of doing in Haringey at all, because it wouldn't work?
I think we don't want to rule anything out sort of definitively. So that's why that's still sort of an option to be reviewed. The retail group who undertook the strategy for us, that worked with practically every London borough and also throughout the UK, it was their advice really that we didn't have those larger markets that would help subsidise smaller ones to make it feasible to have a markets team and to operate under the as a markets borough formally. There are advantages of doing that, but it seemed to be, well, the disadvantages at this present time seem to outweigh the advantages. And so their recommendation was that we should maintain the street trading license route rather than the market borough act. So yeah, I think it's unlikely that it would be a feasible option unless we grew the markets within the borough to a significant scale. But it's something that I think we should keep reviewing, particularly if there are potential legislation changes as well around street trading and market operations. So I would say it was unlikely at this moment, but I wouldn't want to say definitively that we would not look at it in the future.
Okay, thanks for that. So I suppose, you wanted to bring something in.
Thanks, Chair. I was only going to add that I think the way we operate at the moment makes us a little bit more nimble, because we are sort of, we're still developing where the best places are. And I think that mostly it seems to me from what I can understand is that where councils do act as a market operator as well, that they have got very long established big markets, that have been going for probably centuries, and therefore there is a need to keep those going, and they can do a cross subsidy. We're not in that position. I think at the moment we've got that sort of light of foot. We can sort of be nimble about where we are developing, and if so, we want to look at markets that are at minimum 20 stalls, because less than that you don't really get the draw for the market. So I think it just enables us to have that flexibility at the moment, is my feeling.
Okay, thanks. So on that basis then, I'd like to propose a recommendation that as you develop the market strategy and the implementation of the market strategy, and hopefully the markets that exist in Haringey are expanded and become more successful, hopefully, that you keep that kind of decision under review with a view to maybe potentially, if it's going to be workable for Haringey in the future, to think about developing an in-house market service, which I think would be in line with our insourcing strategy that we've got, a policy that we believe that services are better delivered in-house than outsourced. So I don't know if members of the committee are supportive of that as a recommendation. Okay, so that's a recommendation then. Does anyone else have anything else they want to raise or recommendation they want to make? Councillor Connor.
This is a minor recommendation, so it's probably not a large one, but just about the strategic process going forward, Keith, around, obviously I know now who to contact, but other councillors with the town centres that you will have I don't know if they will or won't know. So I would just be really grateful if we could have like a very sort of draft outline of next steps, and the councillors that are involved in those wards could be sent that, so that they all know that, you know, these meetings at this point, you know, approximately in the next month or two, whatever the date, you know. So it's not sort of like set in stone, but it's just to give people an understanding of where you're going, and that gives us enough time so that we're knowledgeable before residents ask us the details, because they will do. And yeah, as you know, it's really good if we're on the front foot on that. So that'd be really helpful just to get that. Those meetings, and even if it's just an initial one set up just to begin that process, that'd be really helpful. Thank you very much.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for that suggestion, Councillor Connor. I think that we could, what we should do is to write to all councillors and set, you know, just with a brief summary of where we're at, with a cross section to the website, so that they can get the information. And we could even send out the slides as a reminder and as an attachment to that, and with a point of contact of, we can just sort of change it for each area, so that your point of contact is this. Would that answer your?
It would, but if there could be specific ones set up, so it's a Crouch End, so the councillors know, just to get that more focus. So I agree, the whole council, absolutely, all councillors definitely, but I think a focused ones, because obviously there'll only be so many councillors that want to turn up to Crouch End one, or, you know, if they're not Crouch End councillors. So, you know, it's just get those initial meetings, just we can meet the teams, we can have discussions with you, and we can just have that oversight of where you're kind of going with that, what areas you're looking at, etc. That'd be just really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, we're happy to do that.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, guys, for coming in and talking to us about your market strategy. Yeah, thank you very much. And you're free to enjoy what little remains of your evenings. Oh.
Just you also asked, the committee asked as well for us to include within the paper an appendix on skills and apprenticeships. So
apologies.
There's a one-pager on there.
So yes.
If anyone had any questions, my colleague.
Apologies, I omitted that
as well.
Does anyone have any questions on that, or can we just take that as noted? Note. It's in the papers. I read my papers online, so yeah. It's different.
So yes, the appendix on Turnpike Lane. Sorry.
Sorry, on the
so it's page 71.
71.
It's an appendix to the report, and then the presentations are after that.
It's literally the last page of the report.
Questions in writing?
I would suggest that if members do have any questions on this, that maybe we put them in writing and get written answers. Because I think most members have read it. If you don't have questions, or if you think of any questions, maybe we can put them in writing, and you can respond in writing.
Well, we'd be happy to do that, but also we'll be happy to come back on another occasion and talk to you generally about Opportunity Haringey and, you know, how far we've got, especially because we've got the business forum coming up, and you know, we can include apprenticeships in with that if you wish. I mean, we're happy to do that.
Great, thank you.
But we can do the, you know, any obviously answer any written questions.
We certainly might include that in our work program. Yes, sure. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you again. Thanks for coming in, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening. Okay, all that's left for us before we end the meeting is the item on the work program. So first of all, that's to note the work program or suggest any amendments. I don't know if anybody has any. Councillor Buxton.
I mean, just like I noticed, I mean, this is my first year on overview and scrutiny, so I don't know how it's functioning. And I mean, we haven't had, we've obviously had cabinet members come, we've scrutinised finance fairly rigorously. We've had the leader. I mean, the cabinet member for libraries and leisure centres is also under our brief. I know she came in for the call-in, but hasn't had a dedicated cabinet member questions, so I don't know what the.
So my comment on that is that in to some extent our work program in terms of what we cover in our meetings has been a little disrupted by the extended budget process this year. We've spent 2 full meetings and 2 part meetings that were just about the budget, and there's also a lot of other finance information in terms of quarterly reports, performance information that we need to scrutinise. That has, to an unfortunate extent, pushed out some of the other stuff that we ought to be scrutinising that's under the remit of this committee. So I've been in discussions with officers about how we're going to resolve this issue, and we've not yet reached a conclusion on that. Partly because increasing the number of meetings that we hold. I'm sure everyone is very keen to have yet more meetings, but there's also the issue of officer resource to cover those meetings. So we've not reached a conclusion on that yet. But yeah, I take your point, and it's a valid one, that we have spent a large part of our time scrutinising the finance stuff, and not a huge amount else. This evening has been a bit of an exception. Yeah, Councillor Connor.
I was just wondering, because we bought in leisure centres, didn't we, to OSC? But that was only quite recently. I mean, it used to sit under yours. Yeah, so I'm just wondering, Chair, whether it would be worth, because acknowledging exactly as what that you've said, is actually we are going to be needing to do a lot more finance, apparently, through OSC. Maybe some of the stuff that's just literally been bought in the last year or two into OSC could go back to the.
That is one potential solution. The reason we came up with the current arrangements was to try and rationalise the arrangements of what areas the panels were scrutinising to align with the cabinet member responsibilities, and I think we've done that quite successfully. Sorry, Phil, did you want to come in on that?
I mean, just to say, I guess the part of a process of trying to rationalise how many cabinet members were responsible. So, the environment panel, for instance, had 4 or 5 cabinet members at one point in them. So that given you only have 5 meetings, it's a bit unwieldy. But yeah, I think for June, every year the OSC sets what the terms of reference are for itself and the panels, and in the run up to that, there will be a discussion about which panels have responsibility for what.
We are going to have to come back to this at the beginning of the new municipal year, because there are going to be different arrangements. Because we do need to receive somehow in scrutiny. We need to receive the quarterly finance reports, the quarterly performance reports, the outturn, the complaints report. That's a lot of stuff, and that doesn't leave a lot of space for other stuff. So we do need to come back to this, but. We're working up a proposal at the moment on how to do that. So does anyone want to suggest any changes to the work plan or any items for future meetings? We can certainly return to this offline. Okay, so the other substantive item here is the draft scope in terms of reference for a review on placements policy for temporary accommodation and discharge policy, which is under your panel, Councillor Worrell. Did you have anything to say on this before we?
Just it's quite simple, really. The council are reviewing these policies in the coming kind of 6 months or so. So in terms of focusing our limited resource on an area where we felt we could influence something, we decided to do a short focused review on how we best make use of our TA allocations and discharges into the PRS. And yeah, hope that's all right with everyone.
Great. So does anyone have any questions on that for Councillor Worrell? No, are we happy to agree that formally so that this can go ahead? That's agreed. Right. Just wanted to say one other thing, just for the record, which is that we have now got a new protocol in place for co-optees to panels. So the process for appointing co-optees has now changed, and co-optees will be formally appointed by this committee. So it will obviously be for you as panel chairs to discuss with your members who from what kind of organisations are able to provide the expertise, the skills, the experience that are needed in order to contribute to your work plan for the next year. But appointments will be made every year at the start of the municipal year at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and anyone who is already a co-optee so all co-optees that are currently on your panels will need to be reappointed, and any new members, up to a maximum of 3 co-optees per panel, will need to be appointed, and you ought to do this in accordance with what you need, what contributions, what skills you need to contribute to your work programme. So that's just for information, just for the record that's been noted in this meeting. So does anyone have any questions on that before we close the meeting? Okay, all right. So that's it. There's no new items of urgent business. We're meeting again on the 8th of April. It's 10 to 10. Have a nice evening.